thought that the pandemic phase of COVID-19 was winding down, a recent COVID-19 Omicron outbreak in China began on March 1st, 2022. China immediately imposed a complete lockdown in Shanghai and partial lockdown in 45 other cities on 27th March with very strong virus elimination policy of zero tolerance. Today, the lockdown moves into its fourth week, but the world's largest exporting country, China, is still clinging to its stringent zero tolerance approach that relies on harsh lockdown, mass testing, and quarantine in government facilities. In today's episode, we will discuss the grave issues of logistics and supply chain disruptions due to this Shanghai Port lockdown and its impact on a world that was just starting to return to normal. Shanghai city alone accounts for almost 5% of China's GDP and contributes to 10.4% of China's trade. This lockdown has impacted more than a quarter of their population and 40% of their economy. The zero tolerance policy extended to Shanghai Port, the world's busiest hub port, which is handling 48 million TEUs per annum, has wreaked chaos on global trade, impeding the inflow and outflow of a massive number of shipments. From a logistics and trade point of view, Shanghai Port is a spinal point in the global supply chain and a key gateway for foreign trade. Shanghai's and much sprawling global trade means that the lockdown would have severe implications worldwide once again. With a month-long lockdown, we are talking about almost 5 million TEUs pendency being built up and accumulation which can wreck the supply chain planning of every country across the world. The Shanghai Port is critical and retains its crown as the world's busiest container port due to the following reasons. It handles an enormous container volume exceeding 48 million TEUs per annum. With 125 berths in the port, its 82 berths can accommodate vessels of 10,000 dwt and above. The total quay length is about 20 kilometers. Over 2,000 container ships depart from Shanghai Port every month. It operates 293,000 square meters of warehouse spread over 4.7 million square meters of storage yards and has gigantic 5,143 units of cargo handling equipment with the most advanced technology. It has special purpose areas for hazardous cargo containers and reefer containers, and it offers container stuffing and stripping sheds all across. Shanghai is also a chief aviation hub in Asia. The city's airport, Pudong International Airport and Hokiao Airport, which again is one of the world's largest cargo carrying airports, also managed 122 million passengers in 2019, making the city the fourth busiest aviation hub in the world after London, New York and Tokyo. The lockdown impact was initially nibbling at the economy of China, but now it's taken a big bite and threatening to hamper the trade globally. Though Shanghai Port is technically functional under strict restrictions, the reality is far from the truth. And here is why this situation is extremely worrisome. Number one, no cargo can move in or go out of any warehouses to the port. 90% of trucks supporting import and export deliveries are out of action. Almost all the vessels have started to skip the port call in Shanghai. Number 4, the long delayed pickup of cargo from Chinese factories to the port has led to massive pendency of humongous scale. Number 5, lack of labor, severe shortage of trucking capacity and minimally operational warehouses have impacted the yard capacity while struggling to adjust the world's largest cargo warehouses, particularly for reefer cargoes. Number 6, even 1 week's closure of a port can disrupt sailing schedule of the rotation of vessels, which can take 6 to 9 months to return to normalcy. In this context, A 1 month closure of the biggest port in the world means vessels rotations of more than 2,000 vessels being disrupted, creating havoc in vessel schedules at a global scale. Zero tolerance policy mandatorily requires truck drivers to hold a negative nucleic acid test or NAT test, and that report which is taken in the last 48 hours, as well as a printed road permit, full itinerary and delivery destinations. These requirements are putting extreme strain on availability and leading to increased turnaround times. Many truck drivers are unwilling to drive to Shanghai and nearby areas due to the risk of testing positive and being quarantined for 2 to 3 weeks at government isolation centers. And number 9, with the growing number of refrigerated containers piling and the limited availability of electric plug-ins and refer points, Shanghai Port has run out of space for refrigerated cargoes. And lastly, number 10, normal vessel delays before this lockdown had already reached 2 to 3 weeks, and the current crisis is expected to stretch delays up to 4 to 6 weeks for any sailing from Shanghai once the port reopens. All these downsides are forcing exporters to choose other nearby ports such as Ningbo, Qingdao, Xiamen and Shenzhen as an option. With Ningbo also reporting heavy logjams and congestion, there are fears that lockdown could be extended soon to Ningbo port, and which will further complicate the deliveries. Since the situation is extremely volatile, a freight rate upsurge is inevitable due to the following reasons. Number 1, severely hampered vessel and container availability and extended delays will be pushing freight rates higher. There is a rise in transportation costs, detour fees and highway fees, which in addition to freight charges for transshipment and storage, equipment rental and electrical connection. Transporting goods by airlift can further soar the freight rates and end up putting an even more pressure on global supply chains. Fuel cost increase due to war and conflicts in Europe will increase the cost of shipping clients, and this will be another reason for the increase in freight rates. And when it comes to India, the impact is even scarier given India's dependency on Chinese import for raw material. Chinese imports are around 14% of India's total imports, while exports are merely 3.4% of goods to China. India-China bilateral trade increased by 15.3% to over $31 billion in the first quarter of 2022 despite border clashes. Just when an upswing was in sight, the month-long lockdown has drastically hit the pharma and the electronic sectors in India. 70% of India's active pharmaceutical ingredients or APIs requirement is met through China. India import up to 80 to 90% of mobile phone components from China. Other principal imports include steel, automobile parts, telecom instruments, computer hardware and chemicals. Small and medium-sized exporters will be more affected since they cannot absorb the higher cost and are not in a position to get space on the vessel since they do not have the volume bargaining power. If this situation persists, India's overall global export business could scramble as it hugely relies on the export of raw material from China. Such logistic disruptions are stalling the country's economic recovery just as markets finally started opening up fully after a 2-year hiatus. Indian exports just reached an all-time high of $417 billion, but the lack of raw materials will impact the further growth of exports in the short term. Indian firms can survive the short-term stock delays and live up with the 50% volume maximum for another month. But beyond that, the disruptions will bleed the already wounded supply chain industry. To summarize, the lockdown imposed on 27 March has reawakened the uncertainties of potential disruptions in the logistics and manufacturing industry. After the first wave of the pandemic, we learned some bitter lessons about the uncertainty faced by the logistic industry. So far, the sector has maintained some degree of resilience in the value chain and limited astronomical rise in freight rate. But beyond this, recovery from the current setback will be dramatic. The disruptions couldn't have come at a worse time when India Incorporation's input costs have already elevated and global supply chains remain tangled in the aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. All eyes are now on China's review to ease the lockdown measures in key cities, mainly ports. We are hoping this zero COVID policy is reviewed as supply chains cannot continue to absorb setbacks anymore. Well, I hope today's session was insightful and engaging. Thank you for being such an inquisitive audience. For more facts and information on logistics, subscribe to my YouTube channel. See you again next week. Thank you.